This will be recorded. Have to make that announcement. And we're going to begin just with a word of prayer. Lord God of us all, we ask your blessing on our gathering today. We're grateful for our sister Penny and for her work in our midst. Open our hearts and our minds to her message, one that can be hard to hear, but one that can also enhance our understanding of our community's history and create in us an urgency to work harder and harder toward your beloved community. Amen. So I become convinced that every community needs a Penny Washington. Penny is an historian by training and experience, and she's turned that training and experience to our local community, particularly the lives and the experiences of African Americans in our community. And that work is invaluable. Ms. Washington is a native of Westchester, an alumna of Westchester University. She serves on the board of the RTCA, or the Radnor Township Civic Association, which is a mission partner of this church. She's also published several articles about African American local history in the Tredefford Easttown Historic Quarterly. I have a few reprints of those articles on this table. You are welcome to look at them. You're also welcome, if you would like me to make you a copy, to sign your name on a piece of paper, and I will get you a copy. Penny has also served as a historical consultant for People's Light. You may know that People's Light in the last few years has commissioned and produced several plays with very local roots, looking at the experiences of local people and telling local stories. Two of these, Mudrow and Bar Rustin, Inside Ashland, had very deep roots in Westchester. And Penny, as a native of Westchester, produced two tours of Westchester looking at relevant sites to these productions. I checked, and those tours are still available on the People's Light website. So if you'd like to take a look at Penny's tours of Westchester with a focus on African American history, it's well worth your time.
Thank you.
So this year, Penny was kind enough to accept our invitation to participate in our celebration of Black History Month. And our focus this year has been on Brown versus Board of Education, which I think you know is the U.S. Supreme Court case which ruled that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. One of the kind of towering figures in Brown was Thurgood Marshall. And by a really happy coincidence,
Or not.
the People's Light is producing a play on the life of Thurgood Marshall, which begins at the end of the month. It's entitled, appropriately enough, Thurgood. And there's some information about that here, so if you'd like to continue to pursue kind of learning more about Brown, that would be a good way to do it. We're also privileged to have some representatives from People's Light here today. And I just want to say thank you for being here. We appreciate your presence, and we hope you feel comfortable and at home here. So the last thing I want to say is that today Penny is going to present some local history, and that local history is a story that is a precedent to Brown. These kind of local events took place throughout the country, really, prior to the important decision in Brown, and were absolutely critical to the events that Brown kind of culminated. So Penny's title is right here, the Mainline Fight for School Integration. And I am just delighted to welcome Penny Washington to Wayne Presbyterian.
Good morning. I greet you in the spirit of enlightenment, and I greet you in the spirit to acknowledge the Most High. So this presentation is dedicated in loving memory to the late Patricia Crutchfield, my mentor. And this presentation is also dedicated to Miss Esther Long, the last survivor of the school fight. So let us begin. Segregation and discrimination were ever-present realities. Oops. Are we good? Okay, thank you. I'll start again. Segregation and discrimination were ever-present realities for African Americans living on the main line during the Jim Crow era. Despite these indicators of a false narrative of presumed white supremacy, the schools in East Town and Tredyffrin townships did not draw the color line during the early days of the 1930s. Each grammar school maintained classes for grades 1 through 8. Pupils entering the 9th grade would go to a consolidated high school. Each township would elect their respective school boards, and each township would be responsible for administering all educational functions. In an effort to improve overall efficiency, a decision was taken in 1931 that would have far-reaching consequences. The townships would place all educational matters in the hands of supervising principal William Groff. Those in positions of power agreed that the schools would be segregated. This action was presented to the mainline African American community as being a beneficial move. The white power structure maintained that the decision that they took was in line with prevailing racial attitudes of the times. A March 10, 1932, Mainline Times newspaper headline said it all. Quote, "Townships will provide exclusive colored schools," end quote. African American parents objected to being compelled to send their children to several older, poorly maintained schools that had been designated for members of their race. Mainline African Americans would respond quickly to this news. The community was angered and they were disappointed. Many had relocated to the north, and they presumed that they had left behind Southern segregation and its violent enforcement. The migrants learned that segregation was also to be present in their new northern environments. Primus Crosby was one such individual. Crosby was an Alabama native, and he had attended Tuskegee Institute, and he had studied under Booker T. Washington. Crosby had settled in Berwyn, a small town as we know on the main line, by 1918. He was a printer by trade. He was dismayed by the turn of events, but he would turn his dismay into action. It was he who convened the first meeting about the school situation. The meeting was held at Berwyn's APA Hall, and it was agreed upon by those in attendance at the meeting that a petition stating the community's grievances would be delivered to school officials. It is recalled also that Edgar Powell and William Tyree were associated with these early efforts to remedy the situation. The first mass meeting occurred on March 16, 1932, and it was held at the Robinson Welborn Colored Elks Lodge, number 794. I reiterate, hundreds were in attendance, including O.B. Cobb, president of Bryn Mawr's NAACP. It is interesting to note that the Bryn Mawr branch of the NAACP was founded on the main line as a result of housing discrimination. Crosby's bold action put him in danger. He was in danger because he took it upon himself to transgress racial boundaries. There was a lynching in nearby Coatesville in 1911. So that lets you know how dangerous it was for him to speak up. However, Crosby would not be deterred. In time, the African American community supported a boycott of the segregated schools to express their outrage. Eventually, Crosby and Mr. Cobb met with noted African American attorney Raymond Pace Alexander. Alexander was born into a large family whose roots can be traced to Virginia. Like many of their generation, his family had migrated to Philadelphia. Raymond Pace Alexander began his working life at the age of 12, and he was earning money as a dock worker, and he was selling newspapers to assist his family. Alexander then went on to graduate from the University of Pennsylvania and Harvard Law School, class of 1923. He would go on to become the leading civil rights lawyer in the city. As a result of his successful law practice and his business acumen, he was able to have a summer home, affectionately known as Skywater, and that was located outside of Coatesville. Despite his standing within the African American community, he retained an affinity for the working class of his race. Perhaps it was that deeply held empathy that persuaded him to take the case on a pro bono basis, for it was indeed the mainline African American working class parents who were fighting for their children. Alexander was assisted in this work by a brilliant, all-black, Ivy League trained lawyers. His team consisted of Maceo Hubbard, Harvard Law School, class of 1926, John Francis Williams, Yale Law School, class of 1922, his wife, Sadie Tanner Moselle Alexander, and she has the distinction of being the first African American woman to earn a doctorate in economics from the University of Pennsylvania. And she also graduated from the University of Pennsylvania Law School, class of 1927. To place the conflict in its proper historical context, a brief legal review of matters pertaining to Pennsylvania, African Americans, and education will be helpful in our understanding of the unfolding events. The first act was passed on May 8, 1854, and that act required all schools to establish race-based schooling. The second act of 1881 overrode the earlier act, making it unlawful to make a racial distinction. And the third ruling occurred on the federal level with the infamous 1896 Supreme Court case known as Plessy versus Ferguson. The ruling stated that separate public accommodations, and schooling would be considered a public accommodation, were allowed if they were deemed not inferior to those offered to whites. This interpretation, according to the ruling, would not violate the 14th Amendment, guaranteeing equal protection under the law. In reality, the accommodations on offer to blacks were always inferior. This was intentionally done to reinforce white supremacy. However, and this is a critical distinction that I would like to stress, however, African Americans, working with the resources they had, they always sought to provide excellent accommodations for their own people. Many tactics were used by the white power structure to ensure segregation continued. At the time of the school fight, 1932, no African American lawyer had been admitted to the Chester County Bar. No lawyer of any race could plead a case in any county in the Commonwealth unless admitted on motion of a lawyer licensed in that county. Alexander had diligently prepared the documents on behalf of his clients. He then proceeded to take the documents to the courthouse in Westchester. The clerk of common pleas refused to accept them due to the fact that Alexander was not a member of the Chester County Bar. Thus, race was subtly employed as a barrier to the case moving forward. However, things did proceed when a white member of the Chester County Bar intervened on behalf of Alexander and his cause, and the documents were then filed. The writs were filed against the Tredyffrin and Easttown school directors, as well as the supervising principal. In early 1932, legal wrangling continued to manifest itself on the part of the segregationists. School officials then questioned the validity of Alexander's claim. Their position was that the writs of mandamus were not proper. A writ of mandamus is a legal decree commanding action be taken in the performance of a public duty. In my opinion, it is reasonable to presume that providing quality education for all of a nation's children would be a beneficial public duty in an enlightened society. The Pennsylvania Attorney General, William Shander, would not intervene in the case until it suited him. This was a naked power move that revealed much about his lack of character. The president of the local NAACP recalls that Chandler was mean and insulting in his interactions. The white power structure hardened their stance. Chandler was adamant in his position, and his position was to uphold the law as it currently stood. Superintendent of Public Instruction, James Rule, threatened to withhold state funding if there was non-compliance for following the dictates allowing for compulsory schooling. Alexander's attempts to secure state support for his claims were unsuccessful at this time, but just as the segregationists tightened their hold on the reins of what they believed to be power, the African American mainline community would begin to further exert their moral authority. And they did so. They fed people who had lost their jobs. Indeed, people did lose their jobs. And this was done in an effort to force them to send their children to segregated schools. Parents that had the economic means sent their children to other locations where their children could continue to be educated. There were community efforts to raise money to pay fines because fines were imposed upon parents for permitting their children to be truant. And they willingly went to jail. Dramatically, jailings began in the fall of 1933. The first arrest occurred on October 19, 1933. 4 men from Berwyn were arrested and carried off in handcuffs to Chester County Prison, where the possibilities of beatings or death were real. Factors to be continued. A 5-day sentence was imposed. The four brave men were Walter Harrison, Andrew and Virgil Hearn, and Mount Zion AME lay minister Charles Shepard. Their courage is recalled. Quote, they set up their stance. Someone has to go first. Let it be us. Subsequently, dozens were jailed or fined. The legal battle continued. Attempts to settle things were unacceptable to the African American community if segregation was maintained. Alexander recalls that he traveled at night to various churches to secure testimony. He relates that he took at least 50 trips doing so. I maintain that this was a dangerous undertaking because many of the churches were located in remote areas. Alexander could have been stopped by white vigilantes and violence could have ensued. One woman was responsible for breaking the impasse, and that woman was Lillian Williams. Her granddaughter, who was actually a neighbor of mine and shared this story with me, Paulette Ware, reveals that Williams was a resilient woman, but Ware did not learn of her ancestors' involvement in the matter until years later. During the course of the school fight, Alexander advised the parents facing time in jail to tell the officials that they must allow their children to accompany them in jail because they have no one to care for them. Williams, with an infant in her arms, agreed to go to jail in her husband's place. He was the breadwinner for the family, and his absence from work would have been devastating for the family during the dark days of the Depression. It is interesting also to note that Williams refused to have her fine paid on grounds of principle. What a woman. What a black woman. Her stance is also courageous because if she had entered jail, the possibility of sexual assault was very, very real. Her actions broke the stalemate, and the court ceased jailing parents who would not allow their children to attend segregated schools on the main line. The NAACP played an important role in the school fight. However, initial requests for help were not forthcoming from the Philadelphia branch. Perhaps the branch thought the matter at hand was too much of a challenge. In time, matters were thankfully reconsidered, and the Philadelphia and Bryn Mawr branches would work together. Examples of their unified efforts include sponsoring mass meetings, often held in large capacity, African American churches, whose power in part derived from the increase in membership resulting from the Great Migration. National figures such as Daisy Lampkins, who was a distant relative of mine, were used to raise funds for the cause. The NAACP also picketed outside of the Pennsylvania Attorney General's Germantown home. The NAACP provided bus transportation to Harrisburg to air their grievances before lawmakers. The African American community vehemently objected to the fact that their tax dollars were being used to help build a new whites-only elementary school. By the second year of the school fight, an end was indeed in sight. Chandler had repeatedly refused to enter the fray on behalf of the African American parents. On March 8, 1934, Chandler informed an African American delegation that he would now consider offering help in the situation to bring matters to a conclusion. He wrote a letter to the local head of the NAACP, dated March 17, 1934. The letter stated, "I am willing to do anything in my power to try and settle the unfortunate differences." Note, he only became involved in the matter when he needed African American voters to become governor. But God don't like ugly. Because he was not successful in gaining the votes that he needed to secure the nomination. Yes. The Coatesville Record newspaper dated May the 1st, 1934, informed the public that the Tredyffrin Township school controversy ended yesterday when Negro boys and girls and white children attended the same school. Decades have passed since that early spring day when life on the main line would change for its African American residents. Esther Long is the last survivor of the school fight. She was a child living with her loving family when her schooling was interrupted. Her father was indeed one of the ones jailed for keeping her out of school. Despite this trauma, and make no mistake about it, it was a trauma, she went on to graduate from high school and she worked in the healthcare profession. We now must examine the legacies of the school fight, for they are of local and national importance. First, on the local level, the mainline African American community prevailed. Indeed, an obvious form of segregated schooling came to an end. Secondly, gains were made on the state level. The outcome of the matter aided in the passage of the Equal Rights Act of 1935. An interesting note, Crystal Bird Fawcett, an African American woman civil rights advocate, became the first female African American elected to any state legislature position, and that year was 1938. Importantly, African Americans began to understand the power of their vote. A Pennsylvania state marker was placed at Devon's Mount Zion AME Church as a result of Bertha Jackman, who is with us today. Bertha, please stand up so you can be acknowledged for the work that you did. Thank you, Bertha. To recognize the site, because the church was the site where many of the meetings occurred. And Roger Thorne wrote a seminal article published in the Tredyffrin East Town History Quarterly, bringing much attention to this important chapter of mainline history. The NAACP was compelled to recognize that leadership abilities were present and are present in all classes within the African American community. The school fight had national significance. Raymond Pace Alexander would establish a meaningful connection to Thurgood Marshall. Alexander and Marshall would work on a 1948 civil rights case known as the Trenton Six, and by 1939, Alexander's brilliance was recognized within the African American legal community, so much so that Alexander served as a legal advisor to Marshall on the Brown case. Marshall would continue to be mentored by earlier generation of activists, such as WaynePres Alexander. Marshall presented legal briefs for Alexander's review. This work would become a meaningful component employed in the Brown case. It is interesting to note that the school fight, despite the historic and heroic efforts of all involved, was eventually resolved on a political front. School segregation would remain a pervasive reality for African Americans throughout much of the last century. Pennsylvania African Americans would battle for educational equity in Chester, Downingtown, Kennett Square, and indeed my hometown of Westchester. Marshall would litigate the Brown case before the Supreme Court and later become the first African American to sit on that Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's ruling in the landmark Brown case did not bring about school desegregation on its own. However, Southern white resistance, and it was violent, along with Northern white complacency and machinations, helped give rise to the modern civil rights movement. Sit-ins, boycotts, and marches, led by African Americans themselves, would eventually lead to the dismantling of Jim Crow laws throughout the nation. The Brown ruling would set a legal precedent that would overturn the 1896 doctrine of separate but equal. This doctrine was used to uphold segregation in all public accommodations. Desegregation in the area of public accommodations would be achieved throughout the nation only after African Americans and their allies put themselves at great personal risk. Despite the much touted ruling, it fell short in reaching its primary objective, and that objective being the full integration of the nation's schools. There's a difference between desegregation and integration. Inequality continues to exist in our public school systems because the finances to fund schools are linked to racialized housing patterns. There exists a vast difference in the economic resources that fund schoolings in white wealthy areas, such as the one that we're living in, as opposed to the funding available to poor communities of color. The school fight is noteworthy in conclusion because it helped provide a legal framework for the Brown decision. The Brown ruling was but one event in the long narrative of African Americans seeking justice in this country. Mainline African American working class parents fought for better for their children. In doing so, they helped make things better for future generations. I am thankful. A worthy fight deserves our remembrance. Thank you very much for your respectful time.
Penny has kindly agreed to take some questions or discussions, so if anyone has a question or comment, please come forward.
Penny, do you have a sense of when the children went back to school, how did they do that? Did they go back to a grade they had left? Had they been homeschooled? You know, how do you return after being out of school for so long?
Excuse me, I just need to get a sip of water, and I'll be happy to address that question. So, to answer your question, how do you go through a major disruption of your education like that? In some cases, some children never did go back. They had lost so much time. Some never went back. Some students were homeschooled. Some parents, if they had the economic resources, sent their children to other places to be educated, but that's a ripping apart of a family, and that's traumatic. Um, like I said, Miss Esther Long did manage to graduate, but there were many of the children that just, their education stopped at that point. Yes, yes, Bertha.
And also about that students went back to school the day after the war.
Can you speak into the mic, please?
Yes, I'm sorry. The children did go back to school the day after the bombing, when the fight was over.
You are correct in that point. Miss Esther Long just recently told me that when she did go back to school, the teachers just ignored her. Yes, Bertha, again, you had a comment? No, that's fine. I welcome your comments.
I forgot to mention that they did go back to the same grade that they left 2 years prior.
Now, how traumatic is that? Yeah.
Children to be cool.
Yes.
Tired.
Yes.
Kids because they couldn't deal with that kind of authority.
Yes. Yes. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am? Yes? How are you today?
Good. Hi, Penny. Thank you so much for your dedication in bringing this story to a wider audience. I do want to share that a lot of the information that she has shared is up in the display case, and there's pictures and things, so you might get another way to put the pieces together in your mind by checking out the display case. I was interested in how were the Black children treated before all of this happened, when they just all attended school together? Were the Black families happy with the education they were getting in the area? Was it unusual that they were attending together, or were they attending together but yet it still was kind of internally segregated?
Well, let me provide some historical context. Happy is not the word to be used in any discussion of this nature. It's a thing that if you were African American living in American society at that time, segregation was a fact from the cradle to the grave. So that took in all of your educational experience. So you accepted it. But I must strongly share and suggest to you and share with you that even though the schools were segregated, the African American teachers and administrators were excellent educators, and they worked above and beyond what would be expected. And just because you were in an African American educational setting, do not for 1 minute think that you were receiving lesser, because it was those teachers, those Black teachers, that were inculcating and imparting excellence into those students that they encountered. Any other questions, comments? Mika, I want to hear what you have to say, girl.
Well, I can hear what you're saying, but I'll ask you more about how the Black parents who are organizing, Black working class parents who are already organizing in the community to challenge segregation. I'm wondering how they got in touch with WaynePres Alexander, because you mentioned that they were already organizing, they were already challenging segregation. So how did they make that connection, and what were some of the other tactics that they were using to challenge this new situation.
Yes, I can perhaps bring some light on that. African American people have their own networks. So your church connections would be employed, your family connections would be employed, your educational connections would be employed, and the Philadelphia African American community was very much aware of what was happening out here in the suburbs. So that wouldn't have been a difficult connection to be made. And you asked about strategy. Strategy sessions were held at Mount Zion AME Church. How were they going to formulate a petition? Whom would it be sent to? There were gatherings where they would decide, we're going to go to Harrisburg and we're going to go in mass. So they had to arrange a transportation. They had to pick a day that people could actually get there and do it. So it's these kind of grassroots strategy things that took place for the outcome to be what it was. So hopefully that answers it somewhat for you. Yes, Bertha?
Part of the question was, how did the black families get in contact with WaynePres Alexander? There was, along with what Penny just said, there were also some white people involved in that connection. As of right now, I don't have the gentleman's name. I believe he's Kenneth Fresher that they went to. He also made some connections to WaynePres Alexander.
It was a connection that Promise Crosby was able to make, and it went into Philadelphia to meet with WaynePres Alexander. So what I presented today was an abbreviated understanding of the situation. There's much more detail, but time did not permit me to go into every detail of the occurrence, but I chose to select what I thought were the highlights. Yes, Steve, darling, how are you? I'm so glad you're here.
Great. I don't need a mic.
No, you don't.
Yes, I love this lady, first of all. Let me just say that, Miss Penny.
And I love you too, darling.
Yes. I just put something in the room a little radical. As I was sitting listening to your presentation, and I'm also the director of Thurgood at People's Life. I was wondering your thoughts on the doctrine of separate but equal. And I'm glad that you articulated that just because it was black schools and when things were said, didn't lessen the quality of the education from the teachers and the community, our community, period.
Yes.
So then I began to think and wonder, when integration happened, it did not change the minds of people. Now it became the law. The Thurgood believes that. How do you can use the law as a weapon for change? And when the law was changed, it didn't change the minds. So then I think about children who then in integrated schools had to endure trauma in order to get education. So then I go, was segregation, was that? If it was truly the doctrine separate and equal, and if we had justice, what did segregation was a two-edged sword, right? I mean, it integrated. Integration is what I mean to say. But then there were still some negative impacts upon the black community. I just wanted to let you know.
So let me address that. Like I said in my remarks, people confuse the terms integration and desegregation. I maintain that we are not fully integrated, not only in the educational system, but every other system in this capitalistic society which we find ourselves in. But the effort was to desegregate an institution I'm gonna be a little radical too, but I'm in church, so the Lord's gonna come to me. I know it's gonna come to me too. But let me just settle myself. If you believe that all people are created equal, how can you allow systems that with every move they make force your understanding that you're not equal? That's a question for all of you sitting in this room this morning. Because inequality still exists. It still exists in the school system here on this main line. Now what y'all gonna do about it?
Talk about it. Me personally, I'm very radical. So I will put it in another serious, proper perspective. My name is Kevin Strong. I started in a traditional school district in 1960. Wasn't that long ago. So for me to hear this, and yes, I know the story, yes, there's a lot, but it never changed. Because they let us into schools, they still did not treat us equally. And here it is in 2023, they still don't treat us equally here in this main line. I've worked a lot with the students and with people like, no, guys. But it's just, it bothers me because just like Penny just alluded to, people call themselves Christians, Catholics, this and that, and we love each other, but they still don't treat us equally. Here in 2023, they're trying to erase our history. Don't let them erase our history here or anywhere else, but that's what they're trying to do. And so when I look at this whole decision of what happened, yes, there was a lot, because I've heard the story. Maisie B. Hall, she was one who used to teach kids in her house. I grew up in Mount Pleasant. Those of you that know Mount Pleasant, best neighborhood in the neighborhood. But no, seriously, the only thing I do want to say is that, it was hard on a lot of parents. My mom went all of them. A lot of them went through all of this, and they never still accepted us. A lot of them, yes, didn't have that gap to where they lost their education. A lot of them definitely did not excel in any aspect of their life. Why? Because they still don't feel treated equally. And here today, it's still happening. So I thank you for your presentation. It was very good. And yes, to our girl, Patricia Crutchfield, I'll allude on that just a little bit. She was our educator in Conestoga in the school district. She worked a lot with our children, and she just recently passed. But she was very instrumental in making sure that the powers that be, that's where it starts. The powers that be are the ones that's going to make the change. And then after that, it starts in the homes. What are you teaching your children? Are you telling the truth? Or are you hiding? Or are you going through the same narrative that certain people are doing in 2023? Be mindful, be voting, and faith without works is dead. Do your work.
As citizens and voters in Pennsylvania, are there any issues before the state legislature where you feel that enlightened viewpoints might have some weight? What on the present political scene do you see either promising or negative that we can become involved in?
Look at that curriculum. Look at that curriculum. Look at the structure that's used for funding. Because this whole conflict and battle was about having access to resources. So let me be a little bit more radical. Well, I feel like I can. It's not about me sitting next to me. My physical proximity to you, meaning white people, that's a very dangerous So it's not about what people like to have the myth of me sitting next to you. The African American community was wise because they knew to follow the resources. And that was what they were after, an equity of resources. So I say that was the situation in 1932, 1934, and it's sadly still the situation in 2022.
Hopefully, the decision by the Commonwealth Court this week will improve that situation with regard to school funding. I'm sure it will continue to be a fight, but one of the things I think we can do is to make sure that the opinion does indeed get executed properly.
Good morning.
Hi, how are you?
My name is Senator Brown, and my aunt was Louise Hitchens, and she went to school at Stratford Elementary School, and she was one of the first that was removed from the school, and she could no longer attend. And I was told by her that when she went back to school, they would have different levels of where she could actually participate in school and put them in different slots. She called them different slots.
And they did that in my schooling in Westchester, and my parents advocated for me not to be the place where I was assigned.
Right.
So I thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and it happened to my mother as well. She was born in 1929. And my great-grandmother moved from the South so that they could get a better education from Indian law. And my grandmother insisted that she put the education in all of her children. And that was one of the stories that I was told firsthand. So I appreciate you bringing that up in Museum Hall as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for what you're following.
There's a question over here, I can't see.
Good morning, beautiful morning it is. It's so nice to be here. I do not have a question, Penny. Since I've been back, I came back. Well, I'll start with the fact that my family was Hollies. They lived in Devon. Fortunately, my mom was the oldest, I think she was. But anyhow, because they worked for a caretaker, a white caretaker, they got the best of everything. As far as education, she was able to go, what do you call it, traditional, East End, that's what she called it at that time. The reason I'm saying this, I just want to share with you, I had an experience. My family moved us back to Virginia, not back to Virginia, we were all from here, and we moved back to Virginia, and I was fussing the whole time, and I was one of those that was fighting, and the kids would line, white kids would line their lunches off across the sidewalk to dare us to step on their lunches, and I was one of those bold ones. But I thought it was only there in the South, this experience of the schools. You know, it was just about prejudice. You had to be outspoken like I am, and make yourself be noticed to do well, or to get in with we didn't have white teachers. Our teachers were also all black. But it's just a cute little thing. I'm a black American who's proud, but I'm partially white American. Because 50% actually of my family, they're white, believe it or not. So it didn't help me with the color. But I just want to say, when I talked to my Aunt Elsie Fuller here, she was in that fight. She would tell me all these stories that Penny's telling me, and I could not believe this is here. I thought it was only the South that suffered. The schools were prejudiced, and we were put in our place, and we couldn't be in this class, we could not take this course or whatever. And when I heard the stories here, through my Elsie and my mother, a lot of the Hollies and Penny, the back Penny has really educated me. I am just shocked, because I thought I was the only one by leaving here going to the South and experiencing these things. And then I find here it's the same thing happening here. So I'm glad we're going forward, but I do hope that
we can see a change. Because I'll be 84 in a couple of days, and I've seen it. I'm older than Penny. So I just had to share with you. I was shocked and surprised to know that the same situation here that we have in the South was happening. But thank God, there's a step. There is a step that's the positive step, I should say, we're moving forward. So thanks for letting me just sharing my memories with you. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you. So anyone who has an interest in this, you can look up on the internet on the Berwick case at Roger Thorne of the TE Historical Association, wrote a nice article, about 20 pages.
Yes, I read
And
it.
you might have it there.
No, I referenced it in my.
Oh, okay, good. The other thing, I was privileged to live in Mount Pleasant for 16 years, and I know Kevin, and I've actually been harassed for 20 years. But I've been blessed by knowing Maisie Hall, Kevin, Delia Jones, so many others, and I got a lot of sons who are non-biological who went to TE schools 15 years ago, and they told me that they're not treated the same for sure. And that just put it nicely. The other thing is, not only did the students were hard and, didn't lost a lot of school, but the teachers, Nancy Hall was hired as the principal, and all the other teachers were black, and they were fired after the people protested. So they went off and got jobs and all, but they were also sort of put upon.
Yes,
So-
that is a consequence of integration.
Yeah.
It's not publicly acknowledged, but that is a consequence, and that, real impact on people's lives and livelihoods.
It is 10:30, so I think we're going to have to bring this to a close. I just want to say this has been one of the best discussions I've ever participated in at Wayne Presbyterian. I am grateful to all of you for showing up and lending your thoughts and your experiences. Oh, Ms. Jackman has one more comment. I can't ignore that.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry. But I just wanted to is there anyone here from the school board, from the trip? Oh, hi, how are you? Okay, good. I just wanted to mention about the possibility of a program that you all are planning. Did you want to say something about it?
I'll just say it's not formed yet, so I don't have anything to announce, but we are looking at learning more about it and identifying all the families that were impacted and addressing the best way to commemorate that in the community. We're just so grateful to Ms. Washington for having dug up all this issue and continuing to do the work to bring it to the fore. It's something that I think we all need to acknowledge and be aware of that's happening in our own community. So thanks. I'm sorry, I'm Roberta Timothy, president of the TE School.
Yes, thank you very much, because I just wanted to say one of the projects that we're trying to work at, when I say we, I'm talking about Mount Zion, is to reconstruct the names of all the students and adults that were involved in the school fight. There were a couple of opportunities that have been missed. I know back around 2004, 2005, Roger Thorne had a big meeting where the Berwick School used to be. And he was not able to get the names of everybody involved. Several years ago, we were trying to see if we can get the names, but we just want to reconstruct the list of all students and adults that were involved, so we can just move on and, and celebrate, well, not celebrate, but celebrate the success of the little band of people who fought for their children and their descendants.
Thank you. I want to invite you all to come again next week, same time, same place, when our guest speaker will be Miss Constance McAllister. She is a longtime Philadelphia educator and retired principal at the John Bartram High School. She has been here before, and she will speak next week about her experiences in the Philadelphia school system and how Brown has influenced those experiences. I also would like to invite you to our coffee hour, which is right through that door. Stop in to have a cup of coffee or tea and a little sweet. And finally, our worship service begins at 11 o'clock, and please know that you are all so welcome to join us for that service. Again, thank you to all of you,